It's been 5 days since Nashville voters weighed in on funding improved public transit, who to send to Washington, and who should represent us on Tennessee's Capitol Hill. Today, my guests are my Nashville Banner colleagues who followed these races from start to finish. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. It's Banner and Company. Well, welcome, everyone. Steve Cavendish is here. He is president and editor of the Nashville Banner.
Hello.
Stephen Elliott covers metro government and has been reporting on politics and elections here for many, many years.
Thanks
Welcome
for having
the
me.
other Steve. Now, voters said yes, or I guess the ballot language was for transit. Let's talk about what was different this year compared to 2018.
I think there were a couple of things. One, having it in a presidential election as opposed to its own election guaranteed a much bigger turnout. There had always been an argument among transit advocates about what kind of election to put this in order to give it the best chance. That was obviously the biggest piece of it, and it obviously was borne out. There were more pro-transit voters just going to the polls, regardless of kind of what the plan was. But the second thing is, and I think this was you saw this in all the messaging. They were very deliberate about emphasizing the things that were not mass transit, signals, sidewalks, and then buses was always kind of the third sort of piece there. And that messaging was very deliberate to reach people who are never going to get on a bus. And I think they were smart about it. It ends up winning by 2-1, so you have to say that the campaign itself was a success. But by choosing to target non-mass transit riders with some piece of this, they gave themselves a much bigger possible window of voters that could support it.
You also had 6 more years of bad traffic.
Yeah. Traffic did continue to get worse, and people continued to move here. So that, I think, was a key part of it. But another important element was this plan was smaller than the one in 2018. The price tag was smaller, even in today's dollars versus 2018 dollars. And there's no light rail, there's no tunnel under downtown. I think that stuff could have attracted support. It was a tightrope that this year's group had to walk between providing an exciting plan that would get people to come out and vote and tell their friends about it. And also in 2018, it was so big that it attracted a lot of opposition. Big money came in to air TV ads and canvass against the plan. And this year that just wasn't the case. There was a small opposition, but they weren't well-funded and they weren't terribly organized. So the For campaign just kind of swamped them.
I saw a smattering of TV ads and signage. It seemed like it wasn't quite the full court press that it was last time.
Campaigns are being waged in different fashions, and campaign operatives will tell you that sort of the days of like the all-air war slugging out on television. Television's obviously very important to it, but the days of reaching all of your people that way are over. There's a lot of digital targeting, a lot of really sophisticated digital targeting, and there was a lot of ground game. I mean, they tried to lock. They had targeting for a lot of voters that they reached at their doorstep. And I think that's really important. And to kind of emphasize too what Stephen was saying, this campaign was very deliberate in their outreach early to take opponents off the field. Mm-hmm. There was AFP Tennessee, Americans for Prosperity, which is the big kind of Koch brothers backed group and one of the biggest opponents of the last round. We're at there. I don't think you would say that they were for it, but they certainly weren't against it. And when you begin to take those players off, there really wasn't any sort of kind of visible opposition except for some yard signs. I think Stephen's use of the term disorganized is pretty accurate here. They were at a very scattershot approach of like trying to go to some community groups and try to, put some op-eds in the Tennessean and some other things. I mean, those things just don't work anymore. You have to have a big, well-organized campaign if you're going to fight something that was pretty well organized on the transit side.
Stephen, how significant is this for Freddie O'Connell and his mayorship?
I think one way to think about that is to think of the hypothetical where this fails. It's 1 year into his first term in office, and he pushed back once when I said, "This has kind of been your whole thing, transit," and said, "No, we're doing all these other things." But he came into public life on the MTA board. He was its chair. He was the president of Walk Bike Nashville. This kind of stuff really is his bread and butter. It's how people know him. So for him to put this forward in his first year and have it fail, I think it would have been really damaging for his tenure. And it could have opened the door to people wanting to challenge him. It could have weakened his administration's position in council for other things. So I think having such a resounding victory kind of slams that door and is a big win for him in terms of political capital. And
What happens now, though, guys? I mean, how specific have they been with the benchmarks for by X date you're going to see this, that, or the other?
They got into a lot of that the day after the election, the morning after, and
they posted the job.
Yeah, they posted a job to manage this program within the mayor's office the very next day. And so they'll be hiring that. The money doesn't start rolling in. So the sales tax that's part of this plan will start being collected in February. That's when you'll see it on your receipts. But it's not going to get to Metro until April. And so they can't really, they're not going to be rolling out sidewalks before then. But they're doing a lot of the planning now so that the easy stuff, the low-hanging fruit, they can do right away. So I think what they've said will be the easiest stuff to get going on is some of the easier sidewalks, which means like ones where the right-of-way is already owned by the city or it doesn't require a lot of special engineering. And then some of the sidewalk or the traffic signals that they're going to modernize, they're going to upgrade almost all of the traffic signals in the county. They can do some of those pretty quickly. The stuff that will take longer, it's a 15-year plan, so the stuff that will take a lot longer than that is the complete redesign of some of the main roads. That's a big key element of the project that will take years to design. And then also the transit centers, which are going to be dotted around the county. That'll take a long time to identify where they want to do them, buy the land, design the building, and then actually build it. I'm sure some of them will come on sooner than that.
And they were pretty cagey through the whole process about were they going to have dedicated lanes and bus rapid transit kind of as a part of this, because a big part of this is going to be a negotiation with the state over right of way on the pikes that are many of them are fully owned by the state or fully managed by the state, and so that's the thing that for huge transit enthusiasts who wanted to see, if we're not going to do light rail, they wanted to see a robust kind of bus rapid transit system. This is the thing that they're still nervous about is what's the state going to allow to happen on some of these really busy roads, and will they be able to do it in a way that buses can kind of zip by traffic? Because that's always the sort of the promise of this is that the system is efficient enough that you can ditch your car, and being able to have right of way on these pikes is still a very, very open question.
Do you think there are those on Capitol Hill who still have an appetite for sort of putting a wrench in Metro's wheels and maybe causing some problems for this right-of-way issue?
I think that's certainly a possibility. The tension between the city and the state sort of cooled off last year, but who knows what that situation is going forward. I think Butch Ely, who's the commissioner of the State Department of Transportation, we interviewed him a few months ago specifically about the transit plan and dedicated bus lanes, which would require his sign off on state routes. And he was open to it, and he praised the mayor, and he praised the plan, and he said transit is important. So he's a little friendlier of a voice at the state level, I think, than some people in the legislature might be, but legislative approval is also required. So if, for whatever reason, the Metro Council's in some fight with the state at the exact moment when the plan to approve a dedicated lane on Murfreesboro Road comes up, then that could throw a wrench in things, as you say.
And this is the point where you say the O'Connell administration was very deliberate about bringing Darren Jernigan in to be that liaison. Jernigan's a fairly well-liked, well-respected legislator on the Hill. He just gave up the House 60 seat out on kind of the east side of the county. Jernigan was pretty instrumental in sort of taking the temperature down on some of this here in the last legislative session. And the O'Connell people have been very specific about trying to say, okay, new administration, we could start over. Let's not have all-out war with Nashville, like what kind of the last couple of years of the Cooper administration were marked by.
I'm Demetria Kalodimos. It's Banner and Company. We'll be right back.
Quer desenvolver os talentos da sua equipe e potencializar os resultados da sua empresa? Conte com a expertise do atendimento corporativo do Senac São Paulo, que já capacitou mais de 1 milhão de pessoas e profissionais de instituições públicas, privadas e terceiro setor. Construa uma equipe altamente motivada e capacitada e destaque-se no mercado. Entre em contato, acesse sp.senac.br/corporativo e saiba mais. Quer saber? Senac.
There will be no new faces in Tennessee's congressional delegation this go-around. Here to talk about it, Steve Cavendish, and Sarah Grace Taylor, who covers state government for the Banner. Did anything surprise you about the results we saw on Tuesday, Sarah Grace?
I think Democrats might have been surprised by how little ground they gained. But no, for the most part, results were pretty predictably Republican in Tennessee, with a lot of incumbents doing well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It was always going to be hard despite whatever noises have been made about trying to gain seats in the legislature, it's always going to be hard for Democrats in a year that Donald Trump was on the ballot to gain ground. And I think that we saw the results of this throughout these congressional races. Megan Barry had hoped to kind of close the gap against Mark Green in the 7th. I think if they had gotten it to a 10-point loss, you would have seen some real kind of celebration on their side. The numbers were roughly what they were when Odessa Kelly ran against Green 2 years ago, and so that just shows like kind of the power of the top of the ticket. Being able to blunt whatever money, organization, or whatever Barry may have brought to this race.
Of course, Green was a candidate, then he wasn't, then he was again. That made it interesting.
Yeah, Green originally said that he wouldn't run for another term, and then story goes Donald Trump reached out personally to Green, and he decided to run for a final term. Then he had kind of a rough year with some personal stuff, a divorce and an alleged affair in the middle of it. But it didn't seem to stall him, and he didn't even pick up campaigning much after that happened. And he spent the last week stumping for Trump in other states, not campaigning in his own district. So I think he knew what most people knew, which was that he was pretty safe in that district.
Yeah, it was funny. What was the release that came out that on like Monday over the weekend or Monday that he was up in Pennsylvania? That's how little of a challenge he thought Barry was to him by Election Day.
And his only ad that he put out, which was, I think, beginning of October, maybe end of September, wasn't even focused on local issues at all, but just repeated Megan Barry's name next to Kamala Harris's and Joe Biden's. So he just spent his time aligning himself with Trump, and it served him well.
What did you hear out in the field about Megan Barry as a candidate?
Not much. I think the fact that she was on the ground as much as she was, and it didn't seem to make a difference, and people weren't necessarily more mobilized because of her, shows what we knew was true and what ended up being true, which is that Nashville's not getting progressive enough, and the outskirts around Nashville, like Clarksville, which was in the same district, aren't moving to the left as much as Democrats had hoped it would. So it didn't do much. It didn't move the needle at all. And in fact, in Nashville, we saw fewer votes for Kamala Harris than for Joe Biden. So if anything, it's moving the other direction, at least during presidential years.
Yeah, I think the true test of this is going to be what happens in an off-year cycle. And this is the problem that Democrats have had is kind of being able to play a long game, being able to be organized for more than a cycle, being able to fundraise for more than a cycle, until they can be competitive in 2, 3, 4 straight cycles where they're building name ID and building kind of message identification and having a message that resonates, and finding some pieces of policy or message or whatever else that can win outside of Nashville, and kind of win outside of like the corridor to Clarksville, in this case in the 7th. They're going to continue to have these issues. Like this is not a one-term kind of fix or one cycle fix. It's not. This is something that is a decade or more in the making, and the open question is kind of how much patience Democrats in the state have for that.
Before we get off the Green Berry, Sarah, talk a little bit about the personal revelations that came out and how we approach that as the banner, that might have differed a little bit from more traditional local media, at least initially.
Well, Green filed for divorce in August from his wife of over 30 years. And we initially decided that we weren't going to chase personal life drama because it doesn't necessarily pertain to voters. However, in September, his wife made it pretty public that she was accusing him of an affair with a younger woman. So we decided to go after it once it was out there. And what the interesting part of that story to me isn't necessarily that there was an affair, because of course you have to remember Megan Barry's own scandal. It's not new for a politician to have an affair. But the way that his family and people around him characterized his personality changing, being involved in DC politics, and the idea that he had been less conservative than he was in the past, less religious, less of the family figure that he had sold himself as. I think
the swamp got him.
The swamp got him. He was corrupted, if you listen to his wife and his daughter, by being in DC. And I think it's interesting, especially something his daughter said, which is, they accept that from someone like Trump. To use his daughter's term, everyone knows Trump is an asshole. But she felt that her dad was being disingenuous with the public. Again, did not seem to affect him. Part of that being, I think, the top of the ticket. And part of that being Megan Barry is the last candidate who could have made anything out of that. So neither one of them ever really addressed the other one's personal discretions.
Sort of canceled each other out, yeah. In the 5th District, Andy Ogles, we had his telephone seized. We had all sorts of
Speaking of scandals.
Yeah, minor drama. I mean, why did nothing move the needle in that race?
I think you're seeing the benefit of redrawing these districts around really partisan lines. Republicans during redistricting went to a lot of trouble to kind of carve Nashville into 3 pieces. And there's no single part of Nashville that can overcome kind of the counties that are around it. And in the Miriam Abel-Fazli ends up winning in Davidson County, but really, I mean, to me, the Andy Ogles is from Columbia, and you saw support for him down there and in Williamson County, but the Wilson County support is always going to be the sort of the decider in that. And until there's a candidate from Wilson County or who can speak to Wilson County residents in a meaningful way for Democrats, I think it's going to be the 5th is going to be really, really hard for them to pick back up. And Ogles is a benefit of that. I mean, Ogles is a terrible candidate. He had a lot of natural advantages. He didn't end up getting percentage-wise as much as Mark Green did. Didn't raise money that we know of because his campaign finance disclosures have been amended so many times. We've had a hard time kind of trying to decipher about how much has he actually raised, how much does he actually have. But the natural advantages that are built into that district meant that once he won the primary in a very contested primary, he was going to win the general.
In the state house races, the Brooks Bobo race was interesting because you had two brand new names, people that have not held elected office before. That was an interesting one to watch.
Yeah, I think Shondell Brooks was well positioned to do well in the eastern part of Davidson County. We talked about this earlier, but if there is a part of Nashville that is getting more progressive, it's the outskirts where people can afford to live. So it's unsurprising to see that district stay blue. Notably, she won by less of a margin than Darren Jernigan did the last time he was challenged. So I don't know if she was facing the same contest in a non-presidential election, if she would have done the same as Jernigan or if she would have done worse. So it's hard to say what that means for the makeup of that district. But I think generally she campaigned on gun safety and several statewide issues that are fairly compelling to voters, where both Bobo in the general and her opponent Tyler Brasher in the primary focused on very local issues. I've said before that it's kind of, they almost had council candidate platforms, and I think she benefited from having a broader appeal to people who maybe vote in a presidential year but don't pay attention to as many local issues.
She had said in her interview with me that she was, just shocked at how much money it took to run this campaign.
Yeah, she did pretty well with fundraising, and she out-fundraised her opponent in the primary by a lot. So she had support because the Democrats saw that as a very important race. So did the Republicans. It was the only chance the Republicans really had to take a seat from a Democrat, especially in Nashville. And the Democrats can't afford to lose a seat as a super minority. So they saw that as very important to keep it in the Democrats' hand when Jernigan went to the mayor's office. So I think, she was always going to be well-funded, and she benefited from that.
What about Bo Mitchell and friends, Lee? I know we don't have a lot of time in this segment, but Steve?
That's a nasty race that we may see again. On election night, it certainly sounded like Jennifer Frensley Webb wanted to have another crack at that race. This was from the moment petitions were turned in, was one of the nastiest sort of back and forths. They're still technically in court, although I guess that case is now moot now that Mitchell's won.
Yeah, remind listeners what was at issue.
There were some signatures on Webb's ballot, including 3 signatures, I believe, that they admitted at the Davidson County Election Commission were signed by someone else. They were sent. Mitchell says they were forged. These were the cases of I think these were two of the 3 were active duty military who were now out of the district. But in any case, Mitchell's people wanted a prosecution. They wanted the district attorney's office to go after Webb, and DA Glenn Funk declined to do that. But it gives, from the very beginning, this race was not nice. Bo Mitchell ran ads against Webb that were some of the toughest ads in the cycle, and Webb is mad about it. And I think you might see this race again in 2 years.
All right. This is Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kalodimos, and we're discussing Tuesday's election and what lies ahead. We'll be back. It's Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kalodimos, joined today by Stephen Elliott, Sarah Grace Taylor, and Steve Cavendish, my Banner colleagues. Let's finish by taking a look at the bigger picture, or maybe today we can think of it as the drone shot. Where do we go from here? You were talking, Stephen Elliott, about the effect of Trump on transit here locally.
I think that's a big open question for the transit program that passed on Tuesday, because it relies on $1.4 billion in federal funding. That comes from a lot of different sources, but some people around Trump have been talking about gutting a lot of the local transportation funding that the federal government gives out in pretty specific ways. And I asked the mayor about that the morning after, and he said, we think this money's still going to be here. This is a 15-year plan. It will extend beyond this one presidential term. And then he said if the funding is not available, we'll have to scale back some of the capital-intensive parts of the program, but we'll still do a lot of the service improvement stuff and some of the other parts of the program. $1.4 billion is a lot of money, but it is not the majority of the amount.
Might they be more forgiving with a program like Nashville, where we're starting from kind of scratch, than cutting something that's a long-standing existing program that's been pulling federal dollars all these years?
Yeah, it's hard to speculate on that. I know that a lot of the transit supporters during the campaign talked a lot about Indianapolis because several years ago we had some federal money coming our way for the AMP, and then the AMP was killed. That money was sitting there for us from the federal government, and then we the state, and we kind of jointly killed it. And then that money just went to Indianapolis, and they now have basically what we were planning to do. So that money does kind of move around a lot. It's hard to predict, I think, but there are a lot of really regular distributions from the federal government that are not. You don't have to apply for and win out of a competition with hundreds of other cities. So I think they're hoping that some of that stuff stays pretty standard, even if some of the bigger stuff maybe is more limited.
Sarah, Democrats had certain stated goals that obviously will have to be readjusted, and in what ways?
So a lot of Democrats, and specifically Tennessee advocates for Planned Parenthood, said this summer that their objective was to get 7 to 10 more seats in the legislature before 2030, which is the next time redistricting will happen in the state. They're concerned about Republican gerrymandering, making it harder in the future to win seats. That was already a lofty goal going into this election, and not gaining any seats and struggling in a couple of cases to hold on to their seats made that pretty unrealistic goal look even worse. And then especially when you factor in how much money that they spent on some of these races. I'm thinking of Clarksville and Rutherford County races where they hoped growing populations meant more Democrat support, and they didn't really see that return on investment. It's hard to think that they'll have the momentum to do better next time, especially by the margin that they need to get out from under the supermajority.
They're also going to be looking for new leadership.
They are. The caucuses in the House and Senate will pick leadership here, and then the state party is going to have to pick leadership as well. It'll be interesting to see kind of what the pitches are from various folks for particularly at the state party level. What is your vision to get the state Democratic Party a win of some sort? And I think that's the thing is, in this cycle, they thought maybe they could get a win and kind of build on it, and they held serve, which is not, given the landscape of how the national wave went, that's not an unimportant thing for Democrats. But it is really hard to build momentum off of saying, hey, we're the exact same size as we were in the last cycle. And it's just really tough. Until they can get a win, until they can kind of build momentum somehow, it's going to be really, really tough for Democrats in the state.
We just heard from someone this morning. You and I had a meeting this morning where someone said, tell me what you're going to do with my contribution. I mean, donors to Democratic candidates are getting tired of spending their money and seeing no results.
Exactly. We were talking to somebody who had given to a couple of different campaigns, and they could see the writing on the wall. They knew that they were giving to a losing cause, and that's some of that is just kind of the difficulties of fundraising and in running a campaign in the state, but also, I mean, until they get that signature win, it's going to be really hard for some of these candidates to be able to go back to donors and say, expect something different than what we've had already.
And I just think nationally, Democrats are also fatigued by how much they've put in and not benefited. And there was a moment late this summer where people thought that changing to Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket would bring out Obama-like turnout, and that didn't really happen, didn't seem to benefit the Democrats. And I think that when you look at a state like Tennessee, where it already seems bleak if you're a Democratic voter, especially if you're a young one or someone who moved to the state since the last time Democrats stood a chance, it's hard to convince them that they're going to get anything out of rallying for a Democrat in the future.
Both Haggerty and Blackburn have been super loyal to Trump as he builds an administration. What if... I still don't know what that is. As he builds his second administration now, what if he taps one of them? Is it possible? Is it out of the question because of numbers?
I think Haggerty is possible. There's no reason to know if he would do that or not. We know that he also looked at Mark Green at one point for Army Secretary, but Green took himself out of the running for that. You know, with the conversation they had about Green running again this year, is there a chance? I don't know. Blackburn has said she doesn't want to join the administration, even though she's a very loyal ally. But it's hard to say this early what will happen, especially if there's turnover like there was in the last Trump administration.
And there's going to be some other people too, like Brad Smith, for instance, ran part of the health side of the government in the last Trump administration. There's going to be people like that from Tennessee, I think, that get tapped at some of these like non-cabinet positions. But you know, if Haggerty took a position, he's been mentioned for state, he's been mentioned for some other stuff because he was the ambassador to Japan. I think that it'll set off as we're starting to look at the governor's race 2 years from now. It'll set off a really interesting kind of Game of Thrones about who will Lee appoint for that Senate position and set them up to run and hold on to that seat versus a bunch of people who have gubernatorial ambitions. It's going to be a fascinating couple of months here to see who gets tapped.
Stephen, in terms of local impact, when the presidential administration changes, what are the stories that are in your notebook that you're looking into?
In addition to the transit story, we've already heard the mayor come out and say he wants to assure citizens that Metro government is not going to change anything because of the change in administration. But the banners Stephen Hale wrote before the election about Trump's promise of mass deportations and what local law enforcement their role might be in that. I think the prospect of deporting millions of people would require a huge mobilization of whether it's law enforcement, National Guard, those kind of people. So I think that's one of the things that we're looking at pretty closely here is how immigration policy changes from the Biden administration to the Trump administration and what the local role is in that.
And Sarah Grace, in the second Trump term, do you foresee the legislature reacting in different ways? writing up some bills that perhaps they wouldn't have if the election had gone the other way?
I think the Tennessee state legislature was always going to do what the conservatives wanted to do, regardless of who won federally. I think in some cases, Tennessee might not have to do some of the things that are on their wish list because it will happen federally. I think, just to piggyback on what Stephen was saying, Bill Lee this week left it open that he would support what was best for Tennesseans when it came to what Trump asked for states helping to deport citizens or non-citizens. And I think Marsha Blackburn ending her campaign talking about immigration in her last ad and mentioning building additional detainment facilities and her overall support of Trump suggests that, our federal... Should I wait for that?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and start that part.
Pick it up.
Sorry. And Marsha Blackburn in her last ad talked about the need to focus on immigration and the border, including building additional detention facilities. So I think certainly our federal delegation will support whatever Trump does on that front.
I think one of the interesting stories that's already come out is what is going to be the role of private prison operators in all of this. One of the companies the day after the election that their stock took off the most was a company called Geo, which does a lot of work in the detention center kind of sphere. You have to believe that CoreCivic is going to be kind of looking at some of that as a business opportunity. Damon Henninger, who's the CoreCivic CEO, is pretty openly looking at a run for governor. And so how all of this kind of plays out will be really sort of fascinating. And I think kind of finally here, the Attorney General, Jonathan Skrmetti, has been one of the most activist attorneys general around the country. Ironically, I don't think that you can say that he's a loser in all of this, but he has made a lot of hay by suing the Biden administration, and it takes away an avenue of litigation for he and his office, and they have built a very activist sort of office. It'll be interesting to see kind of like what they turn their attention to next.
All right. Any final thoughts? 5 days later?
It was a bad year for Democrats in Tennessee, and it'll be interesting to see if a second Trump administration brings the kind of pushback from Democrats that the first one did, and if it helps them the next time around.
Yeah, I think that the thing that we should be watching for is how the tectonic pieces of this, particularly like in voucher legislation, kind of play out over the next session or over the next two sessions, because I think Republicans feel they have a real mandate in some big policy areas in Tennessee.
And this is unrelated to either of those angles, but I think I heard someone say a couple different people actually in the days since the overwhelming transit victory is like that. They would say that noise you hear is the door slamming in the face of anyone who wanted to run against Freddie O'Connell in 2027. So there's still time for that to unfold, but I think that was a pretty interesting observation that I heard a couple times.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. Steve Cavendish, Sarah Grace Taylor, Stephen Elliott. We are so lucky to have your expertise here at the Nashville Banner. Banner & Company is a production of the new Nashville Banner. Our producers are Steve Haruch and Andrea Tudhope. Original music by Verlin Thompson. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or go to NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company.